Did you know that the name of a dog food may say something very important about the food itself? I mean, how much beef do you think is inside this bag of dog food? Beef is all over this bag. It even says with real beef right here in big letters, and even says that beef is the #1 ingredient. Sounds pretty promising, doesn't it? Actually, there may be as little as 3% beef inside this dog food. I know, 3% is nothing. Now, there's no way of knowing exactly how much beef is in here, though the way they have included beef in the name of the packaging basically suggests that there's not much beef in here at all, even though it's the #1 ingredient. Now, this is just one example, and it doesn't matter if you're buying the cheapest dog food out there or the best possible high-end dog food. How is this even possible? How is it possible that beef can be the #1 ingredient of a dog food and still only amount to 3% of the food itself? And how can it be featured all over the packaging and still, only be maybe as little as 3%? Isn't this a bit deceiving? Well, there are rules when it comes to a dog food name or what you can write on dog food packaging. And if we know these rules, we can better understand which dog foods may actually contain a good amount of, for instance, real beef or other real meat, or whether it's just a simple marketing gimmick. Again, this is just one example. The rules apply to all sorts of dog food, and the marketing gimmicks may be just as deceiving for cheaper dog foods as they are maybe for high-end dog food. So let's take a look at those rules and also how it's possible for the first ingredient to only make up a tiny portion of the food itself. Hi, I'm Ingunn, the Norwegian Viking behind Viking Dog Girl. I hold a certificate as a pet food nutrition specialist, and I'm here every week sharing all things dog so that you can live the best possible life with your dog. And I do things the Viking way, which means no sugarcoating and no BS. I give it to you straight so that you can help your dog be as healthy, happy, and live as long as possible. Now, the rules that we'll go through today doesn't necessarily apply to all dog food. However, this is how the FDA puts it. Many states have adopted the model pet food regulations established by the Association of American Feed Control Officials, AFCO. These regulations are more specific in nature, covering aspects of labeling such as the product name, the guaranteed analysis, the nutritional adequacy statement, feeding directions, and calorie statements. Now, if a dog food manufacturer wants to sell its dog food all over the US or in many different states, it's very likely that they have to adhere to these specific rules. So those are the rules that we're going to look at today. Well, more specifically, the rules from AFCO regarding the product name. There are 5 main rules, and I'll go through the rules with you right now, and then after that, we'll go through how it's even possible for the first ingredient to only amount to a very tiny portion of the food itself. And this is irrespective of the actual name of the dog food as well. Now, the first rule is the 100% rule. And an example that AFCO gives themselves is the all beef jerky dog treats. The key here is the all beef. It could have said all beef dog food as well, for that matter. Basically, with a name like this, pretty much all of the food itself would have to be all beef, 100% beef, with the exceptions of any water added for processing, decharacterizing agents, and trace amounts of preservatives and condiments. So it's very unlikely that you actually see a dog food with this name. It's more likely to be a dog treat because basically it only includes one single ingredient. However, even though it might be an all beef jerky dog treat, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no ingredients in there that you don't necessarily want your dog to eat or consume. For instance, for the decharacterizing agents that AFCO mentions, they say substances added to color the products so that it is not mistaken for human food. So there may be coloring agents and preservatives that you don't necessarily want to feed your dogs in that food, even if it's an all beef jerky treat. Now, the second naming rule is the 95% rule. And an example that AFCO gives is Fido's favorite beef dog food. Now, instead of all beef dog food or all beef jerky treats, for instance, they've simply cut out the all and it says beef dog food. And this still suggests that there's a lot of beef in this dog food. Don't you agree? And with this rule, it actually does contain quite a lot of beef. So in this case, it would have to contain or amount for at least 70% of the product by weight. And if you do not count the water that might have, for instance, been added due to processing, if you do not account for the water, the beef should actually, in this case, amount to at least 95% of the product by weight. Now, the remaining 5% may be used for instance, mineral and vitamin mixes or other ingredients that are necessary for the formulation of the product. Now, there's one more important thing to note before we move on to the next rule, because this will count for both this rule and other rules down the road as well. So, if you include more than one ingredient in the name, this has a different meaning as well. So, for instance, if you were to say Fido's favorite beef and rice dog food rather than just beef dog food, this has a different meaning. So basically, beef and rice together, the both ingredients would have to amount for the same amount as beef in the previous example. So for instance, beef and rice would together have to amount for 70% of the weight if you also count the water, and 95% if you do not count the water. However, each ingredient needs to amount for at least 3% of the food by weight. And the first ingredient that's in the name needs to amount for more than the second one. So basically, the first ingredient could amount for 67% of the food, and the second ingredient could amount for only 3% of the food, which basically means you need to make sure you notice which ingredient is put first. So if you see beef and rice dog food, it may mean something completely different to rice and beef dog food. Let's for instance say we have Fido's delightful chicken and rice dog food. It could contain 40 pounds of chicken, 30 pounds of rice, 25 pounds of water for processing, and 5 pounds of other ingredients per 100 pound batch. And this would meet the requirements of this regulation. Or we can create a different scenario for ourselves, saying that Sparky's rice and chicken dog food, for instance, it could contain 67% rice, 3% chicken, and 25% water, and 5% other ingredients. It's quite unlikely that you would find a dog food exactly like this, but it just suggests that you need to be careful about the names of these dog foods, because they really can tell you a lot about the food itself. Now let's look at naming rule number 3, which is the 25% rule. Basically, this applies whenever you add words like dinner, entree, platter to the name. Some examples given by AFCO, for instance, Fluffy's chicken dinner, beef entree for mature dogs, lemon rice platter for puppies. For this rule, the named ingredients must amount for at least 10% of the product by weight if you account for the water as well. And if you exclude the water, it should amount for at least 25% of the product by weight. Now, once again, if there are more than one ingredient mentioned, like for instance, lemon rice platter for puppies, both lamb and rice together needs to amount for those 10% or 25% if you exclude water. However, each ingredient only needs to amount for at least 3%. And the first ingredient there needs to be more of the first ingredient mentioned than the second one. By the way, remember to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications to follow my channel for more videos like this, the no BS videos on all things dog. And remember to follow me on Instagram at VikingIngunn. Now, the fourth naming rule is the with rule. And basically what this means is that you can say, for instance, with real beef, like in this case, and it can be put pretty much anywhere on the packaging, and as long as you say with real beef or with chicken or with rice, that ingredient needs to amount for at least 3% of the dog food itself. If you were to include two ingredients, for instance, saying, for instance, with real beef and rice, each of those ingredients would need to amount for at least 3% each. Now, let's say if this dog food actually contained 10% real beef, including counting for added water to the dog food, due to, for instance, processing, wouldn't the manufacturers name this differently? Wouldn't they say real beef entree for dogs, for instance? Wouldn't that be more appealing for us, and instead of just with real beef? Basically what I'm trying to say is that there's very likely less than 10% beef in here, and maybe more closer to 3%, just because otherwise they would have used different naming rule, wouldn't they? Well, even if there were 10% real beef in here, I still wouldn't think that it justifies all this real beef images here, and the fact that it actually says that it's the #1 ingredient in this dog food, which it is according to the ingredient list as well. Again, we're going to look at how that's even possible, that the first ingredient may amount to as little as maybe 3% in this dog food. Though first, let's look at the last final fifth naming rule, namely the flavor rule. Basically, this gives the dog food manufacturer the opportunity to say chicken flavored dog food, for instance. And the thing is, it doesn't even need to contain chicken in this case. As long as there is an ingredient in the ingredient list that provides the chicken flavor, it could be chicken fat, or it could even possibly be a synthetic flavoring. As long as there is an ingredient that provides that flavor, it's fine. And as long as, of course, you don't write chicken in capital letters and flavor in tiny small letters, that's also a rule. Now, how is it possible for the first ingredient in a dog food to amount for as little as possibly 3% of the dog food itself? In this case, the first clue is the fact that they use this rule, the with rule, that suggests that there's at least less than 10% in this dog food, or less than 25% if you exclude all the water that's added, possibly added. Now, as you may know, on the ingredient list that you may find, for instance, on the dog food packaging itself, the ingredients are listed based on their weight. The ones that weigh the most are listed first. So that basically gives us the idea that since real beef, for instance, is listed as the first ingredient in the dog food, it should be mostly beef, or the beef should be the main ingredient in that dog food, right? There should be more of the first ingredient than the second or the third or all the other ingredients, and there should be more of the second ingredient than the third and fourth and so on. Well, at least by weight. That's not necessarily true though, because the ingredients are listed based on their weight when they were added to the mixture. This is how AFCO puts it. Ingredients must be listed in order of predominance by weight on an as formulated basis. The ingredient that makes up the highest percentage of the total weight as it goes into the product is listed first. Why is this so important? Well, for instance, in this case, where the first ingredient is real beef, just think about this. Real beef may contain as much as 70% water. So when it's added to the mixture while they're producing the dog food, it may weigh a lot because it contains 70 or about 70% water. However, since we're talking about dry dog food, for instance, right here, most of that water is eliminated through the processing. Just think about it, there's barely any water really in this dog food. So what's left? Well, way less beef. Of course, that depends on all the other ingredients. If all the other ingredients also contain 70% water or approximately the same, the ratios would pretty much be the same also when you subtracted all that water. However, in a lot of cases, the other ingredients may be already dry, which means that they don't lose much of their weight and the amount when they go through the processing. However, the amount of real beef will shrink by a lot. And that is how the first ingredient may actually amount for as little as possibly 3% of the entire food itself. And that's not necessarily easy to tell if you just look at the dog food packaging. Not unless you actually know these rules and know these tricks that these dog food manufacturers might be using. That's why it's so important to know these things if you go out and buy dog food for your dog. Now, there is an alternative if you're skeptical to dog food, maybe the ingredients, what it actually consists of, or maybe the processing itself. Because as we have just seen, dog food manufacturers may use all sorts of tricks that they have up their sleeves to make it sound like the dog food actually is way healthier than it might actually be. If you're looking for an alternative though, you should really consider feeding your dog a homemade diet. Feeding a homemade diet, you can feed fresh food to your dog that dogs actually find super delicious, so your dog might love you for doing this, and it can be super healthy and nutritious as well. Plus, it can be quite simple and take as little as 5 minutes on a day-to-day basis if you just follow some simple steps. And a lot of people report amazing health benefits when switching their dogs from a commercial dog food to an all-natural homemade diet. It can be simple, though you of course need to make sure that your dog gets all the nutrients they do need. If you'd like to see some incredible examples of dogs who transitioned to a homemade diet and see the amazing benefits for those dogs, and also find out how you can feed a homemade diet to your dog, then you should check out the Viking Dog Diet System. It's a system that shows you step by step how you may feed a 100% natural, nutritious and delicious homemade diet to your dog in a simple way, including meal examples and even how to transition your dog meal by meal, step by step. If you'd like to check it out, then you should head over to vikingdogdiet.com right now. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if so, then give it a thumbs up and make sure to share it. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.